friends. Here we are at the beginning of another week. I've got a great conversation with Fordham University's Dr. Christina Greer. She's, of course, a political science professor there. And that conversation begins at 47 minutes if you want to jump right to it. But it's Monday, and I want to let you know I'll be hosting a hangout this evening at 8 p.m. East. I hope to see you at 8 p.m. tonight. I won't be able to host a hangout on Thursday because I'm taking my daughters to Vermont to go skiing for a couple of days. So I hope to see you tonight at 8 p.m. at our virtual happy hour hangout. I will be posting great shows this week. I am scheduled to be talking to Dr. Aaron Carroll, Celeste Headley, and so much more. So I hope that you will be tuning in all week because I've got some of the smartest people in the world joining me right here to answer all of my questions about the important issues that affect you, your family, your community, your country, your planet. That's what we do best here. So thank you very much for stopping by, for supporting the show with a paid subscription. Cannot do it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I make an effort every day to give you a great rundown of the news headlines, audio clips, and something I call the good stuff. Try to start off the show and your day with something happy, inspiring, funny, and hopeful. That's a challenging job in a scary world, but trying to do my best here with you. So let's get to it. Great to have you here. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you heard my conversation with Christian Finnegan, the Saturday special. Then yesterday I dropped Sundays with Segall, working hard for you, and super grateful that you are here. All right, I'm going to kick off today's show and the good stuff with a video from Harrison Ford that Harrison Ford did in partnership with the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation. And Harrison Ford, in this video, he shares a message to request that we join him in saving the biodiversity of the planet. We all love Harrison Ford, and this is better as a video because when you hear some of the music here, those are images of nature, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But I hope you like this. I hope you'll go with me on this. It's about a 4-minute and 20-second video, and I'm sharing the audio with you because I thought it was lovely and important, and I fully agree with this ideology. This is how I live my life, thinking about nature and every species out there I can learn about and touch and see and feel and hear. He says at one point, you want to be able to hear the seeds germinating. I think that was a little too far, E.O. Wilson, but I'll take it. Harrison Ford reading E.O. Wilson for today's good stuff. And if you're not driving and you can, I would actually sit and close your eyes for this one. That's how I did it, and I think it makes it a lot better. I never ask you to do that, but for this, I think it's worth it. Take it away, Dr. Jones.
My humble request for the coming year is that we make time to listen to the quiet. My dear friend, E.O. Wilson, rest his soul, would say that the quiet voices are the most important. The krill and the caterpillars, the beetles and the bacteria, the ants. The systems that sustain life on Earth, that put birds in our skies, water in our rivers, oxygen in our atmosphere, are mind-bogglingly ancient, densely interlocking, and only partially understood tapestries composed of millions of species, all exchanging matter and energy in a glorious whirling ballet which is so beautiful. It can put you on your knees when you start to fit your mind around it. But ecosystems aren't just quiet symphonies to admire. Ecosystems allow us our impossibly rich, dazzlingly beautiful lives. Yet we yank threads out of these magnificent tapestries every day. We unravel our own support systems. Every day they grow quieter, while everything else grows louder. Our lives are but a finger snap in the 3.5 billion year history of life on our planet. Any individual life, mine or yours, is nothing but a wisp of thread in the miles-long rope of life. The most meaningful thing we can do in our time on earth is to ensure that the rope isn't too frayed for the next generation. Which young person do you love most in the world? Can you picture them? By the time they're your age, don't you want them to be able to wander into a field some evening and hear the smallest things, the ants and the caterpillars, the seeds germinating in the soil? Don't you want them to grow up with the last few mysteries, opening quietly in the darkness? That's what the living earth has to offer us. A whole poetry of mysteries, of possible discoveries, an infinitude of adventures, and ultimately insights that are the cornerstone for a new way of understanding the beautiful intricacy of our planet and how we can best steward its enduring stability. This hopeful curiosity is the core of E.O. Wilson's books, embodied in the work of the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation, and ultimately brought to life through a deep belief in you and our shared human resolve to save the natural world. Please join me in listening to the voices of biodiversity and taking action to reimagine how we care for our planet. Yes, indeed.
There you go. Harrison Ford reading E.O. Wilson and a great message for a new year. That's on YouTube. I'll link to it so you can watch it and see the imagery as well. All right. Well, I've been learning and reading and learning from, I said learning twice, Nikki Giovanni, who we recently lost, the famous poet, one of the most revered and respected of our time. And so I thought this was an interesting clip to share. Nikki Giovanni reading her poem, My House.
I only want to be there to kiss you as you want to be kissed when you need to be kissed, where I want to kiss you, because it's my house and I plan to live in it. I really need to hug you when I want to hug you, as you like to hug me. Does this sound like a silly poem? I mean, it's my house, and I want to fry pork chops and bake sweet potatoes and call them yams, because I run the kitchen and I can stand the heat. I spent all winter in carpet stores gathering patches so I could make a quilt. Does this really sound like a silly poem? I mean, I want to keep you warm. And my windows might be dirty, but it's my house. And if I can't see out sometimes, they can't see in either. English isn't a good language to express emotion through. Mostly, I imagine, because people try to speak English instead of trying to speak through it. I don't know. Maybe this is a silly poem. I'm saying it's my house, and I'll make fudge and call it love, and touch my lips to the chocolate warmth, and smile at old men and call that revolution. 'Cause what's real is really real. And I still like men in tight pants, because everybody has something to give, and more important, needs something to take. And this is my house, and you make me happy.
Yeah,
so
Nikki
this
Giovanni, My
is your
House. I
poem.
love that. That was great. Really good. Really good stuff. And finally, my personal good stuff. On Saturday night, I got to be my daughter Julia's date. We went into New York City for dinner and had an absolutely wonderful time, an amazing conversation. She was asking me questions all night. I was doing my best to answer about life and politics and her future and so much more. And it was just one of those nights, one of those dinners that you have with one of your kids when we're grown up. Julia's now 17, Ava 19. She'll be 20 on the 21st of this month in about a week. But Jules and I just really had a perfect night. It was so great. We had a lot of laughs and great conversation. And That is my good stuff. Send me yours, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I hope to hear more of it at tonight's Hangout. Finally, I wanted to read you this. I hate these kind of memes. They're cheesy and often stupid, and this one in particular kind of comes from the grind lifestyle, if you will. But I liked it. I'm going for it. I'm going to just read this meme that I saw. It's titled Real Dopamine. Go running, get sunlight, lift weights, cold showers, savor the moment, work on your goals, be bored for a while. Don't check your phone so much. Work hard and be proud of yourself. Increase protein intake, experience new things, get good sleep, meditate, and dance. That is real dopamine. I like that. I don't know. I'm not going to do all those things. You're not going to do all those things, but maybe you'll do some of those things or think about them just a little bit today. Okay, that's what I've got for you on today's segment of the good stuff. I hope you liked it. If you didn't, tell me. I don't want to be wasting my time doing these clips and looking this stuff up if it's just for me, if you don't like it. But I've gotten some great feedback on this segment, so I'm going to keep trying to make it worth it. But now it's time to get to those headlines from the weekend as we start off a new week. Of course, the top story continues to be the cataclysmic disaster, the worst wildfires ever in Los Angeles, California. It is really hard to quantify or measure or describe the destruction in Southern California, which, by the way, of course, is continuing. These fires are not contained. They have claimed at least 24 lives. Today, I believe, is the beginning of the 7th day of firefighters battling these deadly fires. Crews report progress, but officials say the fire threat will remain very high as dangerous winds return this week. Questions over the preparedness for the firestorm have led to political finger pointing, and I'm so not interested in it right now. It really upsets me to see that right now because I think it's very hard to understand exactly what could have been done differently, frankly, what could have been done better. There will be a time for that, and I know I sound like a politician saying that, but as someone who is obviously just interested in it from a human interest standpoint, I can't help but think that there will be a time for that. But that's not stopping political opportunists and people who are just exhausted and broken and scared from trying to find someone to blame. It's partly human nature as well. But when you refer to experts and look at the science, for example, fire ecologist named John Keeley says the bottom line is the winds far outweigh the fuel in terms of fire spread in a situation like this. When you have these winds, it makes fuel less relevant, and the fuels are definitely not relevant once it gets into the urban environment because the primary fuels are the homes. Also, here is UCLA climate scientist saying there's a set of weather and climate conditions that are so extreme under which there's not a whole lot that even very well prepared places can do to manage the most extreme wildfire events. We're seeing the limits of what technology and preparedness can actually achieve in conditions like this. And I thought those two quotes I think I got from the LA Times experts the LA Times referred to really captured it best. And so there are so many hundreds of thousands of people now trying to do everything they can to stop these fires. I'm going to continue to look for the helpers and wait to start laying blame. But that is not stopping, obviously, politicians and political pundits and opportunists, scammers, obviously trying to take advantage of vulnerable people who have lost potentially almost everything. So we'll continue to talk about that. I look forward to talking to our California friends tonight at the Hangout. That's all I'm giving you right now here in the headlines. There are other stories happening. My heart obviously goes out to everybody out there. If it makes you feel better to donate to causes, there are so many amazing sources out there that have been vetted, and we'll talk to folks tonight about more about what we can do as a community. This show, and I am not an outrage machine, however, so I'm not playing that game. I'll let others do that. They'll get big ratings, they'll make a lot of money, and get a lot of listeners and subscribers. I just can't in general, and much less in the wake of these fires. There are other news stories I want to mention and things happening in the world. For example, President Biden and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, met to discuss efforts to reach a Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal by January 20th when President Biden's term ends, according to U.S. and Israeli officials. Israeli officials tell media that a hostage deal is close, awaiting Hamas's approval. The coming days said to be pivotal, so keeping a close eye on that story. Another big deal story that everyone seems to be watching is what the hell is going to happen with TikTok. The Supreme Court on Friday appeared to likely uphold a law that would effectively ban social media platform TikTok in the United States. The 9 justices on the conservative majority court heard oral arguments from lawyers for TikTok, some of its users, and the Biden administration with at least a preliminary decision likely in days. So that is going to be very consequential, whatever the decision is. Hard to believe that TikTok would just go away. And what would that mean for creators out there that are like making their living on it? Glad I didn't invest too much time and energy into it. I would if I knew it was going to continue to be there, but who knows? So we'll pay close attention to that one. At least I will, along with every young person in the world, apparently. We got the jobs report for December, and look at this. Expectations were 155,000 new jobs having been added to the United States in December. Well, it turns out, according to a new report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the totals were far better. President Joe Biden will end his term with a relatively healthy labor market as the United States added a surprising 256,000 jobs in December, and the unemployment rate ticked down to 4.1%. The latest figures indicate the U.S. economy has largely achieved the, quote, soft landing scenario President Biden saw: relatively low unemployment and relatively low inflation. There you go, President Trump. Take full credit and full advantage of this very, very good economy and destroy it all for all of us. I thought this was interesting from, I think, Semaphore got the scoop on this. The Biden administration was making its final major infrastructure spending announcement Friday, devoting $5 billion to 560 projects across all 50 states, D.C., and U.S. territories, according to an announcement shared first with Semaphore. The money from the bipartisan infrastructure law will fund improvements to rail safety, intercity rail service, transport infrastructure, and airports, and will expand EV charging stations. President Joe Biden hoping to make the 2021 infrastructure law a lasting part of his legacy, in addition to bills boosting the U.S. semiconductor industry and fighting climate change. So that major investment being made on the way out is going to be very impactful as well. Or so we hope. Republicans have promised to claw back a lot of that money and those investments, but that's hard to believe that they will or can. In other American domestic political news, I'm closely watching the MAGA Civil War, and the latest battle lines are being drawn by my old friend and yours, Steve Bannon, who is absolutely eviscerated Elon Musk publicly, calling him racist and truly evil. That's right, the ex-Trump advisor and ex-Stand Up with Pete Dominick colleague at SiriusXM, Steve Bannon, denounced the tech CEO's embrace of some forms of immigration and vows to, quote, take this guy down. That's right, an escalation of discontent among the highest profile far-right followers of Donald Trump. Former advisor Steve Bannon has called Trump's newest favorite, Elon Musk, racist and truly evil, pledging to take this guy down and kick him out of the MAGA movement. He gave an interview to a newspaper in Italy, excerpts of which were published this weekend in the U.S., and Bannon criticized Musk's embrace of some forms of immigration, vowed to ensure that Musk does not have top-level access to the White House. Says, I'm making it my personal thing to take this guy down. Before, because he has money put in, I was prepared to tolerate it. I'm not prepared to tolerate it anymore. He added, I'll have Elon Musk run out of here by Inauguration Day. He will not have full access in the White House. He will be like any other person. I mean, this is one of Trump's biggest supporters and cheerleaders, and so is Musk. He's certainly his richest, so we'll see what happens. This is coming to a head, but do you think Steve Bannon can get Elon Musk out before Inauguration Day? I don't think so. Bannon further widened his aim to attack Musk's fellow tech giants, friends Peter Thiel and David Sachs, also for having South African heritage. He said, Elon Musk should go back to South Africa. Why do we have South Africans, the most racist people on earth, white South Africans? We have them making any comments at all on what goes on in the United States. He says that Elon Musk's sole objective is to become a trillionaire, calling him a proponent of techno-feudalism, on a global scale. Bannon said, I don't support that. We'll fight it. He won't fight. He's got the maturity of a little boy. He'll do anything to make sure that any one of his companies is protected or has a better deal or that he makes more money. His aggregation of wealth and then through wealth, power. That's what he's focused on. I mean, could Bannon be any more accurate about this? Why is he doing it? We'll see what happens, but I am here for it. And a few more headlines. The United States on Friday announced that new sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector and its, quote, shadow fleet of oil, what could be a final attempt by the Biden administration to cripple the Russian economy in response to Moscow's war in Ukraine. We'll see if Trump and his administration reverse that. Rudy Giuliani was held in contempt of court for the second time in a week as the former New York mayor and top Trump lawyer's fall from grace continues because of the false information that he himself spread after the 2020 election. The judge called his behavior outrageous and shameful, and that should be what opens his obituary, an epitaph. How about this? India is kicking off a Hindu festival this week, touted as the world's largest religious gathering. So I figured I'd look into that. Millions of Hindu devotees, mystics, and holy men and women from all across India flock to the northern city of Prayagraj, I think I'm saying that right, starting today to kickstart the Mahakumbh Festival, which I'm sure I'm saying right. It's being touted as the world's largest religious gathering. Over about the next 6 weeks, Hindu pilgrims will gather at the confluence of 3 sacred rivers, the Ganges, the Yamuna, and the mystical Saraswati, where they will take part in elaborate rituals, hoping to begin a journey to achieve Hindu philosophy's ultimate goal, the release from the cycle of rebirth. So that I thought was interesting. I want to look more into that, specifically the part where you can get 6 weeks off to go on a pilgrimage. What the hell? How do you, maybe they just go for like a week. It just is going on for 6 weeks. Anyway, I thought that was interesting to learn a little bit more about. President Biden awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom to his religious leader. It's Pope Francis who got the award. President Biden turned to the pontiff for personal guidance in his life and career. So I thought that was worth mentioning. And finally, this headline. The airline industry is optimistic about 2025. Demand for tickets is strong and profits are rising. I thought you might want to know that the airline industry is optimistic. So that might mean something to you. I don't know. It was worth reading. Okay, well, those are your headlines. That's what I've got for you today in headlines. And now it's time to get to the clips that I've found for you. People, they love the audio clips, and I love gathering them and putting them together for you, but it's a lot of work, so hopefully you do appreciate it. Let me know what you want to hear and send me clips. That'll make my life easier. Things that you're hearing on other podcasts, TV shows, radio shows, whatever you're hearing, let me know what they are, and I'll try to share them here. One of my favorite shows to listen to, I try to catch it once or twice a week, and I always read and follow and support The Majority Report with my friend Sam Cedar. And I wanted to grab this clip, which is like 4 minutes long. It's one of those clips where you might forget who you're listening to, The Majority Report or Stand Up, but it's absolutely worth it because Sam and his co-host Emma talk about this new study out of the Journal for American Medicine about trans kids and hormone replacement and more. I just thought this was absolutely worth. This is what we battled about at the school board. There's unfortunately going to be more of this. I thought you might want some science on your side for yourself personally, your family, your school district, and the record. So, all right, take it away, Sam and Emma.
And I also want to say the same thing for the culture war waged against trans people. There is no suggestion, the idea that people were enraged about trans. Are Trump voters upset about trans people? Yes, that's their aggrievement du jour. Yeah. But that didn't create any new voters for Trump.
Right. In 2022, the Republicans without Trump at the top of the ticket were did not do well running on transphobia as one of their central planks.
Absolutely not. And I just want to go over this AP. I mentioned this yesterday, but this is very important to understand because the people out there who are talking about we have some type of social contagion, the people who are talking about trans rights are overcoming everything and you can't send your kid to school without coming out trans. AP reports that JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics, has done a study to try and assess how many children, patients, ages 8 to 17, received gender-affirming care. The data ranges from 2018 to 2022, 5 years. 2022 was the last year I think that they could get the full data as they were doing this study. Only 926 adolescents with a gender-related diagnosis received puberty blockers over that 5-year period. Not 9,000, not 900,000, 926. That's less than 20 kids per state over a 5-year period. Also during that time, about double that, almost 2,000, received hormones. Again, this is from ages 8 to 17. This is over a 5-year period. The researchers found that no patients under the age of 12 were prescribed hormones. So only kids 12 to 18, 2,000 of them over the course of 5 years. Study did not look at surgeries. Other researchers have found those procedures are extremely rare. That's relative to the incredibly rare amount of kids who are actually getting gender-affirming care and medications. And what that suggests, if it's not explicit, is that there are safeguards, that this isn't being done willy-nilly.
Johnny's not going to school and coming back Jill or whatever, like Donald Trump has been saying.
It's not a new industry. Yeah, they're just sending kids to
even the
kindergarten.
people who supposedly are like, listen, I'm for trans rights, but I'm just concerned that we are castrating the children and we are ruining children's lives willy-nilly.
We are not.
Cite the actual data. You can tell me that there's one whistleblower who ends up being considered a freak by everybody who came in touch with her at a hospital, causing bomb threats everywhere, saying that the procedures were too lax. But the actual data tells a completely different story.
Yep.
This, and not to mention the studies that show that the people who receive this care almost overwhelmingly, but almost totally were happy they engaged in this care. And you can't find any medical procedure or any, frankly, psychological treatment
and this
that has any better rate of less regret. So, I mean, this is really important stuff to understand.
Right. And this is very similar data to the one that Joe Rogan pulled up some years ago. I guess it was just 2 years ago at this point when Matt Walsh came on to promote his documentary, where he was saying that there were millions of children in this country undergoing trans-affirming care. And this is somebody who supposedly toiled over this data and did a whole documentary about it. When you see the reality of these numbers, just be clear. These are not people operating in good faith. They're smear merchants directing hatred towards people because they can't deliver on their politics for a majority of Americans.
And when you engage in this culture war, all you're doing, you're not helping children. You're not protecting children. All you're doing is creating more hate. You're creating more suffering. You're helping right-wingers. And you're perpetrating lies and aggrievement and just demonizing the next cohort du jour that's going to be demonized by the right. That's all you're doing.
All right, I love his analysis. Sam and Emma on the Majority Report. Real good, very important, and I wanted to share that with you. It so resonated with me. It's an issue that, unfortunately, I've had to deal so specifically and directly with here in my community, my daughter's school district. And so I wanted to share that because I know it's very, very widespread. I thought it was great analysis and really interesting new research. Okay, now let's get to some of the commentary around the fires and the blame that is being spread faster than the fires themselves, as well as the lies, the mis and disinformation, the propaganda, the insults, the criticism, all of it. And potentially the withholding of aid to those who have suffered as a result of these fires. That's right. Republicans are threatening to withhold aid for real, both in the House and Senate. Here is Senator John Barroso on Meet the Press saying just that outrageous thing.
Can't happen again, and the policies of the liberal administration out there, I believe, have made these fires worse.
Do you expect, though, that Congress and Republicans will still help these Americans in need, even if they don't like their local politics in the party?
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved, and it has to do with being ready the next time, because this was a gross failure this time.
Oh, that's a gross thing to say. That is really... Go ahead. Let's see how that plays out. Republican Senator John Barroso and Republican government. Let's see what happens if you tell people that they can't have the aid that they deserve and that they need. Well, Senator Adam Schiff was also on one of the Sunday shows, and he thought that notion was appalling. Of course, he's a senator from California, just beginning his first term in the Senate after several in the House.
I'll tell you this, Jonathan. I've been in Congress a long time approving aid after disasters. I never once even considered, is this hurricane hitting a red state or a blue state? What about this flood? What about this fire? It has never mattered to me. We're all in this together. It's the United States of America. We need the incoming president to view it that way. We're ready to work with the president to make sure that we have no gap, no air between us when it comes to making sure that we help victims get back on their feet and help California rebuild.
All right, Senator Adam Schiff. There you go. I thought that was important. Gavin Newsom is doing all kinds of interviews. By the way, I watched like a 35-minute interview that he did that dropped over the weekend with Pod Saves America, the former Obama guy, Jon Favreau. Those guys are clearly friends. It was clearly a friendly and not adversarial interview. But more than anything else, in those 30 minutes I watched, Gavin Newsom, the way that he speaks, everybody calls him slick. What if some people are just very smart and excellent at recalling important information, ideas, and arguments? We have a lot of guests on this show that are very good at that. People like Tim Wise. He's not slick. He remembers stuff. Aaron Carroll, he remembers stuff. Eric Segall, so many of the guests. Dr. Christina Greer, who's on today's show. Is she slick because she's very good at communicating and remembering important issues and details? You know, I get it. He's the governor and he's a politician. I understand that he is far from perfect. But I thought in that interview, and in almost every interview I've seen him, he seems to be very intelligent. His ability to access information very quickly and explain things really well. That's my opinion. You California people and those who know him better have much better opinions. I'll talk about it with you tonight. I'm interested in hear from you at the Hangout. But here he is, Gavin Newsom, on Meet the Press yesterday.
President-elect Trump has blamed you for this crisis. He called you incompetent. What's your response?
Well, I called for him to come out, take a look for himself. We want to do it in the spirit of an open hand, not a closed fist. He's the president-elect. I respect the office. We have a president of the United States that within 36 hours provided a major disaster declaration over a text. We had support from the president of the United States, Joe Biden, with 100% reimbursement, all the resources you could hope for or imagine, constant communication. I'd like to extend that to the president-elect. I don't know what he's referring to when he talks about the Delta smelt in reservoirs. The reservoirs are completely full, the state reservoirs here in Southern California. That mis and disinformation, I don't think advantages or aids any of us. Responding to Donald Trump's insults, we would spend another month. I'm very familiar with them. Every elected official that he disagrees with, very familiar with them.
We do know, though, from reporting here locally that one reservoir that serves the Palisades was not full.
And that's exactly what triggered my desire to get the investigation to understand what was happening with that local reservoir. That was not a state system reservoir, which the president-elect was referring to as it relates to the Delta and somehow connecting the Delta smelt to this fire, which is inexcusable because it's inaccurate, also incomprehensible to anyone that understands water policy in the state.
My understanding is that you have put a call into President-elect Trump. Has he called you back?
No, that was months ago. That was after his victory. So I look forward to him again coming out here in the spirit of cooperation.
Forgive me for interrupting you, but you did invite him to come out here. Have you had any response?
No.
Nothing. Multiple times, Mr. Trump has threatened to withhold aid for California wildfires, both as president and now again as president-elect. Are you worried that he might actually do that?
Well, I mean, he's done it to Utah, he's done it to Michigan, did it to Puerto Rico. He did it to California back before I was even governor in 2018, until he found out folks in Orange County voted for him, and then he decided to give the money. So he's been at this for years and years and years. It transcends states, including, by the way, Georgia. He threatened similarly. So that's his style. And you know, we take it seriously to the extent that in the past it's taken a little bit more time. I've been pretty expressive about that in the context of someone threatening our first responders in terms of supporting the immediacy of their needs.
So that's what you take it as, that President-elect Trump is threatening the first responders here.
Well, I mean, it's what he said. He said, I'm not going to support the firefighting efforts. I'm not going to support the state of California as it relates to emergency management. He made this pretty clear during the election, unless they do my bidding.
All right, the governor of California. How's he doing? What are your thoughts? I'm very curious. To those of you who are familiar with him, who know him, and who are living in California especially, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Your thoughts on Gavin Newsom, and I'll talk to you about it at tonight's Hangout as well. Thought this was an interesting and important clip. This is Trump's incoming national security advisor, which is a key and very important position for any administration for national security. He's a former businessman, author, and military guy. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army, won a Bronze Star, serving special forces during multiple tours in Afghanistan, Middle East, and Africa, apparently. He also served in the Bush administration as defense policy director, so he's clearly qualified for the job, I think it's fair to say. Former Congressman Mike Waltz, but he was having to answer questions about the crazy person that he's now working for.
Of course, President Trump made some serious waves this week when he didn't rule out the possibility of using military force to take over the Panama Canal and Greenland. Is he serious about that? Is that really an option?
Well, look, what he's very serious about is the threats that we're facing in the Arctic, the threats that we're facing in the Western Hemisphere. And don't just take that from him or me. The general in charge of our Southern Command, Laura Richardson, testified last year about Chinese state-owned enterprises bidding and buying up portions of the canal, the ports on either side, Huawei, the Chinese technology firm, dominating the free trade zone in their telecommunications, with 70% of of U.S. shipping flowing through the Panama Canal, with our oil and gas exports flowing from the Gulf through there, with it critical for our military. There are elements for the U.S. to come in and defend its critical assets in the Panama Canal, in the Panama Canal Treaty, in the Neutrality Treaty. And for Greenland, there's precedent there as well with the 1951 defense agreement that we entered. And look, to our great friends and allies in Denmark, they literally have a couple of dog sled teams, Jonathan, up in Greenland. And when we're seeing Russia with 60 icebreakers, when we're seeing huge critical mineral, oil and gas, new shipping lanes being opened with the retreating of the polar ice cap, enough is enough of having our adversaries coming into our Western Hemisphere, threaten our national security. And President Trump is ready to take big, bold steps to ensure the United States is well defended.
Okay, we're really out of time, but just let me underline. So are you saying that, I understand the goals, that's a diplomatic goal, or are you talking about using military force to achieve those goals?
Well, look, President Trump is always going to leave all options on the table, but there are a number of things we can enter into to amend those existing agreements. We're hearing from the Greenlanders that they are pushing towards independence, which would allow all types of other avenues. But President Trump's never going to take an option off the table, unlike, frankly, his predecessor. So when it comes to our national defense, that is paramount to the commander-in-chief.
All right, there you go. NSA chief incoming. That's Mike Waltz, and we'll see how things play out once they're actually in office. But scary to think that he is taking that seriously. Well, Justin Trudeau is just resigned from Prime Minister of Canada, and he's in the U.S. right now. He was doing a round of interviews. As a result, he was here, I think, for Jimmy Carter's funeral, actually, primarily. But then he did sit down with, I think, both CNN and NBC. And I've got clips from each interview. First, this is him talking about the fires and the response to it, I believe, with Jake Tapper.
Before I get into the funeral and before I get into what's going on with you back in your home country, I do want to ask, our country and the world really is watching these horrible fires in Los Angeles. Canada has a lot of experience with similar conflagrations. I know that you have been offering resources to the people of California and Los Angeles. What advice could you offer them?
Well, I think unfortunately, over the past years, we've seen it get far worse, and we've seen wildfires increasingly encroaching on urban areas. And that's an interface fire where we're having to train up more local municipal firefighters to deal with wildfires in a way that we never had before. I've been back and forth texting with Governor Newsom. We've offered a tremendous amount of equipment that they're already accepting. There's expertise. There's things that we're having to do to deal with together as we, of course, respond to these fires, but also know that climate change means they're going to get steadily worse, and we have to keep stepping up on fighting climate change, too.
But a lot of people out there might say, what does climate change have to do with this? Explain.
Well, when the summers get drier, when weather gets hotter, when weather patterns shift, communities that were built in a place that, never saw fires are suddenly seeing fires much more frequently. There's a shift in everything that means even what we see now is going to just get worse and worse and worse over the coming decades if we're not serious about reducing our emissions and looking for ways to protect our future generations.
I think that whole interview is worth listening to, and so is Jen Psaki's whole interview at MSNBC. But here is a clip and a key question about the meeting that he had with Trump.
At our borders.
I'm assuming he didn't bring up his intention to publicly say he was going to annex through economic means your country.
It actually sort of came up at one point, and then we started musing back and forth about this. And when I started to suggest, well, maybe there could be a trade for Vermont or California for certain parts, he immediately decided that it was not that funny anymore, and we moved on to a different conversation. So this isn't out of the blue that he's doing this, but my focus has to be not on something that he's talking about that will not ever happen, but more on something that might well happen, that if he does choose to go forward with tariffs that raise the cost of just about everything for American citizens, that on top of that, we're going to have a robust response to that.
Well, one person who might be responsible for that response would be, when you're hearing from a lot of Canadian politicians and leaders, a Canadian MP. This is Charlie Angus talking to the people at the Midas Touch YouTube channel.
We have fire crews in the fire zone, in the danger zones from Alberta, Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia. I spoke with Security Minister at the federal government level, Bill Blair, this morning, who's mobilized Canada's armed forces to provide the quick lift to get more supplies into the fire zone. So the Canadian military now is on full alert to help our neighbors. That's what we do. We help our neighbors. When people are in crisis, we don't blame them and pick fights with them. We help. The fact that Donald Trump as a leader is not down there in the fire zone, thanking the first responders, talking to people who've been burnt out, I personally find shocking, but actually no, this is what criminal grifters do. But I'll tell you one thing that I think has been really interesting. So Canadians are really pissed off, as you pointed out, across party lines, across demographics about this threat that we're seeing from the United States. But as soon as we knew that the fires were happening, the messages that I got completely changed. It's like, we got to get support in. Let's make sure our firefighters are safe. How do we help? So that's what neighbors do. And neighbors stand up and help neighbors in time of crisis. So I'm really proud of the efforts of our teams, our first responders. They're there to help people. I'm glad that the Canadian military is ready to help. As for Donald Trump, he's showing the kind of man he is.
All right. Well, I like to see all of these Canadian MPs fighting back and not taking it lying down or quietly. So that was just one of many that I have heard. And finally, your final audio clip. This is a mishmash that Seth Meyers and his show over at NBC does of his best monologue jokes from the week. And I think this is like the last 2 days of his week. And I cut out the audio of Joe Biden talking about his great grandson because you couldn't hear it very well, but you get the joke, and I thought this is pretty funny. So take it away, Seth Meyers. We always like to end the news clips, which are usually ominous and threatening because they're the exceptions, like to end it on a laugh.
In a new interview, President-elect Trump's incoming White House chief of staff, Susie Wiles, said that she and her team will not tolerate drama. Good luck when your boss is President Gossip Girl. Even Andy Cohen thinks he's messy. In a new interview, a former Republican Congressman, Matt Gaetz, said that he has spoken with President-elect Trump about possibly running for governor of Florida. And Trump shared some advice, specifically, set your Venmo to private. President Biden announced yesterday that his granddaughter, Naomi, has given birth to a baby boy, and he couldn't have announced it at a more inappropriate time. Maybe give people a minute to grieve before chiming in with, but hey, something cool happened to me. You're clearly a great grandpa because you say whatever you want at any time with no filter whatsoever. That's right. President Biden said his granddaughter gave birth to, quote, a 10-pound, 4-ounce baby girl before correcting himself to say baby boy. And already Republicans are accusing him of performing gender reassignment on minors. All 5 members of the so-called President's Club gathered today in Washington, D.C. for President Jimmy Carter's state funeral. And it just goes to show you that as a country, we really don't have a type. Elon Musk said in a new interview that the Department of Government Efficiency probably won't find $2 trillion in savings, but added he could still give President-elect Trump a, quote, epic outcome. Everything he says sounds like a screen grab from Mortal Kombat. According to a new report, New York is the second best city in the country for an active lifestyle, which is a really roundabout way of saying the trains are broken. Enjoy your active lifestyle. The house in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that was used as Walter White's home in the TV series Breaking Bad, is on sale for nearly $4 million. For that house? Is all the meth still there? According to new analysis from a data company, the U.S. ranks 68th in the world in average penis measurement. But you can't do that study in January. Give us a fight. Come back in July. Finally, a New Jersey man was arrested recently for misusing the 911 system after he allegedly called emergency dispatchers 17 times to ask for a ride to a Wawa. But that's kind of on the cops for taking him the first 16 times.
All right. There you go. Seth Meyers. Those are your audio clips, your headlines, your good stuff. Now it's time to get to my conversation with my guest, because that's the best thing we do here at Stand Up. I find the smartest people I can. I often build great relationships with them and trust and charisma or chemistry, I guess, so that we have really good conversations and go to a lot of different places. And I do that with Dr. Christina Greer all the time. Chrissy, to her friends like me, is one of the smartest people I know. She's got a new book out, by the way. It's called How to Build a Democracy, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. And it's very good. We talked about that in today's conversation and much, much more. Dr. Greer, of course, is a political scientist, a PhD, and associate professor at Fordham University in New York City. She's a sought-after analyst and commentator for all kinds of shows like mine. Certainly, we met actually at MSNBC on a panel together that I had no business being on. She's the co-host of FAQ NYC and In the Thick Show. She's recently on Pop Culture Jeopardy with Dr. Jason Johnson, but we're not talking about that. Okay, let's get to it right now. My latest conversation with my friend Chrissy Greer and, more importantly, Dr. Christina Greer right now. And there she is, Dr. Christina Greer of Fordham University and author. Her new book, I've just told you about. Congratulations. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'm very excited to see you, and we're all very excited anytime you join the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year. I think I can
Happy New Year to you. Has anything happened?
I still say Happy New Year until I see the person in the New Year. If I see you in February, it'll be like Happy New Year.
Yeah, but would you say that if you saw me in June? I think there's a threshold. I think there's a threshold.
Yeah, I feel like all of January I say it.
Right.
I think it's okay. So Happy New Year.
Do you have thoughts? You're a deep thinker. You're a spiritual person about like the New Year or any traditions for yourself, any choices that you make? Do you do resolutions?
Yeah.
What does the New Year mean to you, smart person?
I am partaking in Dry January for the very first time.
What the hell? Why?
I never do Dry January because the last few months I've been going hard in the paint. So I always give up alcohol for Lent, and I do sober September. But my dad got sick in September, so I was like, bump this. And then I did damp October. And so I was like, you know what, Greer, we need to check in with ourselves. And so I'm doing Dry January, which feels okay. So there's a level of clarity that I have dealing with life. And I'm like, woof. So listen, all is in divine order. That's my mantra. Even though we started off New Year's Day with tragedy in New Orleans, which is where I have family. And so that was really heartbreaking and really hard to process. And then I have lots and lots of friends and dear loved ones in Los Angeles, some of whom have been affected specifically and directly by the fires. Others are just in limbo. So it feels like a wild, chaotic start to the year. Again, all is in divine order. I do view fire as a regenerative force where it is time to start anew. It's going to be a really long and difficult road for a lot of communities. It's not just like a family, a house. But if we think about phoenixes rising from the ashes, I do think that there's a way that we can imagine a society and a new way of thinking at some point. Obviously, it's still very new and raw for a lot of families who are still going through it. I mean, there's no containment. And I feel like all of a sudden now it feels like California is really far away. Like I wish I could be doing more for my friends who are there. Holding like a lot of emotions, but I do fundamentally believe that all is in divine order, whatever that is. And January 20th is looming very large for me as a political scientist. And I told you earlier, I wrote this piece in my weekly column for the Amsterdam News where I'm like trying not to have anticipatory anxiety about the incoming regime. Yeah. Just kind of like try and remember what is in my control. I can only control what I can control. I cannot control the whims of a 77-year-old man with an ego and tons of power and resources. So can I donate to candidates? 78. He's 78 now, Joy. Can I donate to candidates who are doing amazing work across the country on local and state and federal levels? Yes. Can I have fundraisers for different people who are interested in getting into politics and who I think should meet other people when they come to New York? Yes. Like can I influence the youth of America to think about politics as and public service as a noble and realistic profession? Absolutely. I'm trying to do my part, but I can't get too far ahead of my skis thinking about all the tomfoolery that this regime can bring.
That's really great perspective, a healthy perspective. I'm wildly unsurprised that you hold it. You've written a piece about it. I'm looking forward to hearing more details about this. I mean, we all are sharing in this anticipatory anxiety of when he takes power, because it's already been like riding the buck and bronco that is this child, and he's not even in power yet. So it seems like it's going to be, even harder. And we've been through this to a certain extent before, so it's less shocking. Any other thoughts about the specifics around this guy taking power again, and where your focus or the focus of media or the public's focus should be as he spreads his shit wide and far and floods the zone with insidious lies and gallops all the way through the media cycle, and we have to decide which hook we're going to bite.
Yeah. I mean, I think the second term is more dangerous because he's like cased the joint in the first term. The second term is more dangerous, I think, because he has fewer deep thinking Republicans. Like the first time he did have Republicans who cared about this nation. And that's why they're like, sorry, sir, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. This time he's not even bothering with those individuals. And he literally has the bottom of the barrel and people who have borderline like Nazi tattoos on as high ranking cabinet officials. The quality of people he's surrounding himself with is just denigrated. And like the sycophant level has just been elevated. And the media, by and large, hasn't learned a lot of lessons. And they've been following this man in every single whim since 2015, even during the Biden era. But I think it's incumbent upon us to just not treat him like the kid who keeps dropping Cheerios on the floor and we keep picking them up expeditiously. I don't know about you, but like my desire to be on television talking about Donald Trump has decreased. So when people call and it's like, hey, we're doing a story on why he said Gulf of America instead of Gulf of Mexico. It's like, I'm not interested in talking.
Yes. Oh, sorry. That's my answer. My answer is when the producer calls or texts before they tell me what it's about, I go, yes.
Yeah. And so for me,
I'm available.
I'm no longer available. If it's something that I really have a strong feeling about, I might make myself available on Zoom.
If they're like, do you have any suggestions? And they're looking for your type, a PhD, black woman or something, just say my name.
I mean, don't even get me started on that. But, you know, for example, like CNN, like they like to nowadays, they're like their whataboutism is just infuriating. The sort of MSNBC feels like they're on their own planet and talking to a very specific audience. And CNN is, let's just talk about both sides, maybe. And it's just, I don't have the stomach, the interest, or the desire to be a part of those conversations right now, because I think all it does is just fuel this man. And he feeds off of us constantly talking about him, worrying about him, plotting, all these things. And it's we have to a certain extent, we actually decrease his power by going about our own lives and like giving him, we know he just needs the attention.
I generally agree with that. And who cares what I think? I care what you think. You're a lot smarter. But what do you think if you saw, for example, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett dressing down Scott Jennings? Did you see that clip?
I did.
Oh,
I
good.
mean, that's her role in society. And like, she's a congresswoman, but she's now also taking the mantle of like the resistance, which is great for her and it'll be great for her career. I'm getting a little feedback.
You're good.
But that to me is like, she can choose to do that. I am not interested in taking that road this particular time. And keep in mind, she was an elected official during the first iteration of DJT. So there's a certain level of energy that she has that some of us just straight up don't have. We did 4 years of talking about him and debating with people who are basically questioning our existence and right to claim ourselves as Americans. Like, I am thoroughly disinterested in getting on television and debating with some white man about whether or not I have a right to exist as an American, as a Black American. Like, that's just not what I want to do.
I understand that, and I would never tell you not to trust you, do what makes you. But I just want to say what you, and you probably dress me down and criticize me for this reaction, but I want to see it. Like, I want to see that. I think it's helpful when I see that. I think it's helpful when I do it as a white man. But I also think as a Black person, to putting a white person in their place in that moment, I think that's good. I like it. Am I wrong for feeling that way?
You can feel that way. You can feel whatever you want to feel. But here's the piece that a lot of people don't understand. It's like when the cameras go off, we still have to process the fact that someone told me to my face that I don't have a right to exist. It's not just an intellectual conversation that we're having. There's a real emotional toll that it takes. And sometimes when people say really jacked up stuff on these shows, it is really hard to just go home and wash it off. You're thinking about it for days. Like, you're processing what you should have said, how you said certain things. You're dealing with the hate mail. You're dealing with people calling you the N-word, the B-word, the threats on your social media, the threats to your phone, the threats to your email. Like, all of these things, especially Black women, all the data has shown, we get it the most. Women get it more than everybody else.
Get it. Like, I always say I get it really bad, but it's not near what a woman or a Black woman gets, because it's a woman, it's sexual threats. With a Black woman, it's sexual threats and racism. And I just get, could you tuck your teeth in?
And mine is, I want to rape you and lynch you. Like, you should be raped and lynched. And so that's, fine. You're hiding in the anonymity of the internet, but it's still an energy. And I believe in energy because I hug trees. But that energetic space of dealing with that type of person and then all of the people that they unleash into your cyber world and your internet world, like your email. And just like, I live in the city, so public safety is like something that I don't fully think about because most New Yorkers are a certain way. And I don't really think that most New Yorkers are the people who harass me on the internet, but you just don't know. And so if someone comes up to me, like in the farmer's market, someone's, hey, are you Christina Greer? It's the farmer's market. I feel less threatened because it's the farmer's market. And these are people who know my voice from FAQ because it's my podcast. And I'm asking for apples or my duck and someone's, hey, are you Christina Greer? Because they know the voice because they care about New York City politics. That's great. But if I'm at a restaurant and someone's standing over me while I'm sitting down and they're like, are you Christina Greer? It's my blood pressure goes through the roof. I'm like, I don't know, because we're on TV. You see me, you see my glasses, I have a distinct voice, blah, blah, blah. I just feel like there's a public service that a lot of talking heads do. And especially for someone like me who's not getting paid from MSNBC, my desire to give you my time, energy, and then also like to deal with the aftermath of all this nonsense has drastically decreased.
Appreciate that perspective, value it, and respect it a great deal. You put a lot of work into your career and into writing, obviously. You've got this new book, and I want to ask you about it, How to Build a Democracy, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. A lot of people, a lot of Americans don't even know who at least the first two and maybe all three of those women are. Why did you pick these three women to write this subject about? I know you've been working on it for a pretty long time, and I remember you doing the research on Fannie Lou Hamer, for example, and being inspired and educated by what you learn. And so that's a great part for us to learn from all of that. But why this subject? Why these women?
Yeah. For those of your listeners who've written books, it's like you started, you put it down, times change, it was supposed to be published, there was like a cyber attack of the publisher, like all these things. It comes out when it comes out, right? But I was thinking about, I wrote this book called Black Ethnics and really thinking about the complexities and coalition building between Black Americans and immigrants and Black immigrants, Caribbeans and Africans. And it wasn't lost, and I'm not part of the ADOS crew. I don't believe that there are only true Black people. I don't believe that. I think that there's space for a myriad of types of Blackness.
ADOS, what does that stand for again? I'm looking.
African descendants of slavery. They're like super anti-Black immigrant, and they're so sort of calcified, and they're thinking that oftentimes they end up repeating and like parroting right-wing talking points. It's fascinating. Okay. By and large, they like my book. Obviously, they have not read my book because I think if they've read it, they probably would not agree. But they have a very sort of active internet presence and can be pretty aggressive on their.
Yeah, I've ran into them once or twice, not directly, but so anyway, yeah.
And that's not, I don't believe in divisions. I'm literally trying to figure out how Black people can get more out of this democracy. But it wasn't lost on me that Barack Obama and also Kamala Harris are both A, biracial, and B, not descendants of the U.S. South, and ergo U.S. chattel slavery. And I was thinking about, I wrote a paper with some colleagues about Black women being the keepers of democracy and also the Democratic Party. And it starts with Black women in the U.S. South and obviously expands over time to Black women across the country. We are by and large, as you've seen, immune to the nonsense of the Republican Party in ways that no other racial or ethnic group or gender behaves in the way that Black women do. And so I was thinking about, how did that happen? Like, where does it come from? And it's a lot of hard work. It's not like Black women just overnight became who we are as this powerful force. It's been a lot of like sowing of the seeds of Black American women from the U.S. South. And so thinking about the work of Stacey Abrams in 2018 and how close she came to possibly becoming the first Black female governor in the history of the United States, something we have yet to accomplish as a nation. Where did she come from? And so she's this dynamic politician that I felt wove the traditional insider politics with also outsider kind of activist politics and organizing in this perfect way. And I was like, oh, so if Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan had a baby, it would be Stacey Abrams 50 years later. Like, that's basically, I was thinking about the work of someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, the work of someone like Barbara Jordan, who's the second, and she doesn't get as much play as Shirley Chisholm, who's the first Black woman ever elected to Congress, to the House of Representatives from the state of New York. But 4 years later, Barbara Jordan is the second Black woman elected to Congress from the state of Texas. And she's the first Black woman from the U.S. South. And there's a difference between the North and the South, not according to Mark Twain or Malcolm X, but, there are some differences. So I thought that it would be a really fascinating short book to put together, especially for students, to help them understand the organizing principles of someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a major opponent to my favorite president, LBJ. My second president is Jimmy Carter. And then someone like Barbara Jordan, who was a mentee of LBJ. So also helping people understand the complexities of presidents, where one group of people can absolutely love him because of Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Immigration Act. But then also he's a good old boy at times and anti some of the principles of Fannie Lou Hamer.
I think my question now is about education. You're an educator. You understand where young people are at coming into Fordham and other institutions today. And when someone looks at, say, the title of your book or the conversation around democracy, a lot of young people don't even know what that means. Mm-hmm. And so these three women, why did they care so much about democracy as Black women? I know it's obvious question and answer, but I feel like it's worth fleshing out for people who don't understand the importance of a democracy and democracy in general, much less America's history, flirtations with it, and the lack of democracy, of course, in the Jim Crow South, which is very different in terms of access to the ballot and so on. So I think it's worth almost explaining to young people what it is, what it was, and where we're at, because I feel like a lot of young people and people our age, just for lack of education reasons, don't even understand what democracy is. But Black folks and marginalized communities certainly do, because without it, they have less opportunity and more oppression. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think, and also there are a lot of small d democratic principles we take for granted. We're now like apoplectic and clutching pearls. Oh my gosh, is this new regime going to take these things away? These things were hard fought. Like, we take a lot of things just as given. And so when you say Black people and marginalized groups, I think part of the reason why I wrote this book is like, marginalized groups are free riders from the blood, sweat, and tears of Black people. And so you get more and more Asian Americans and Latinos who are starting to realize, oh, I wouldn't be able to live in this neighborhood, have this type of job, go to this type of school, if it weren't for the blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifices and brutality that was unleashed upon Black people, the only group to have U.S. chattel slavery on this soil. So as we evolve and history has always been erased, book banning has always been a thing. This is why most people can name Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, maybe Sojourner Truth, maybe Frederick Douglass. And those are like the 4 Black people that ever existed in civil rights history. But there were hundreds of thousands of leaders across the country in all 50 states. Keep in mind, we're like 5 generations in Alaska of Black folks. So there are lots of people who've been erased purposefully from history, and Black history is American history. And it's always been viewed as this siloed thing that like, oh, that's for Black people. But if Black people and white people have been interconnected in this country since its inception, how is my history not directly connected to your history? We share history. Right. So like, American history, Black history is American history. When I had my Griot podcast, that was like the tagline. Because for you not to know, white person, who Fannie Lou Hamer is, you should be mad that your school never taught you who she was. You should be mad that your parents didn't sit you around the dinner table talking about these things. There are Black people that we should all know collectively as a society. Because if not, you don't understand your own history. Even though some of the issues may have directly affected me, but I always tell my students, when Tom Brokaw wrote that book called like The Greatest Generation, they're so obsessed with that generation. I was like, you mean the generation that like kept my grandparents out of like decent jobs and housing in neighborhoods?
It does not. I'm sure that
it doesn't compute. So we've always had this fantasy fictionalized narrative of what this country is. And I think it's incumbent upon academics to correct the record as much as we can and really introduce a new generation. I mean, when I ask my students who Shirley Chisholm is, they have zero idea. When I tell them she was the first Black female congresswoman, okay. And then I'm like, and she's from what state? And it's like the state that we're currently living in. She's from Brooklyn. I'm like, how many of you are from Brooklyn? And you get 4 or 5 hands up, and they've never heard of this woman. So they've never heard of Barbara Jordan. So as we get farther and farther away from their legacies, it is incumbent upon us to just remind ourselves of the hard work that these women have put to making this country what it is.
You lost me at remind, because as you said, most people didn't know to begin with. That's the point. Like, they don't know to begin with about a lot of these things. You're not reminding of. I mean, and me included. I mean, I'm reading about your book. I couldn't have told you much about any of these women the way that I've learned in reading and talking to you about it. So it's vitally important for those reasons, because sadly you're not reminding. You're actually you're teaching for the first time. It's so relevant right now as we watch our democracy dwindle. How are you looking at today's version of democracy? Everybody's using the O word, oligarchy. A lot of people are using it. A lot of serious.
I mean, our democracy has always ebbed and flowed. This is just what America has always done. We've had progress and regress. We just happen to be in a regress moment. And we always get shocked when it's like, we're rolling back. But we've always done that if you read history and understand what this country has been. So, like, nothing in this country surprises me. Nothing white people do surprises me. Because, as I've said before in this podcast, as my grandmother nicely sat me down and told me, the only time you should be surprised is when you're surprised. So, no, I'm not surprised. Am I disappointed all the time? Sure, Jan. But not surprised. And so we're in a regress moment, but we've always had people in this country, multiracial groups of people, who have fought to try and get us back on track. And it takes a second, and it takes, sadly, blood and sweat and tears, but it does happen. But we just have to make sure we never give up and just, this is just the status quo. I think the saddest part for me is seeing my parents, who were in their late 70s, who have fought and worked really, really hard to get the country in what looked like and felt like a progressive wind, seeing a lot of their hard work roll back. And my dad said, this is not the country that I thought I'd be leaving at some point in time. I'm in the fourth quarter. So it's you work and work and work, and you think that by the fourth quarter, you'll be able to relax. And that's not in the cards for this country.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously really appreciate that perspective on it, but don't you think that this, as you say, regression, some people might call backlash or white lash when it comes to race and the Black Lives Matter movement, when it comes to gender and the Me Too movement, we went too far and all that, and history is documented. And I feel like a lot of that's what you're saying when you use this as a regress moment. But this seems different in that, specifically with these oligarchs and these these billionaires, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, being in such overt cahoots. I feel like you're going to give me like a cynical response, like we've always had a lot of money involved, but I feel like this is different. I feel like this one is different for some specific reasons of who these men are and what kind of money they have, and how they're also doing similar things in other countries, very similar things. Do you not think it's different?
No, I mean, it's just much more complicated because, as you mentioned, we've got other countries involved. We've got satellites involved. Like Elon Musk is literally controlling satellites. And if Israel can, and Iran and international forces can detonate cell phones, we're dealing in a different kind of type of warfare. However, I mean, when you look at like Carnegie money and Mellon money and all those names that we know that are on the buildings, the Vanderbilt money and all that stuff, it's equivalent to the Bezos and the Musks of today. And they definitely had influence in all levels of government. They oftentimes ran for office themselves. I think the difference now is we just have a lot more people, quantity-wise, and we have a lot more people participating, and it's a lot more diverse of the types of people who are participating, and it's a lot more naked. I mean, before it was like gentlemen's agreements where we can at least work across the aisles, and we all recognize we don't want to be France, where if we starve the people, the only thing the people have left to eat are the rich. Now, these folks are like, then forget it. We'll just deport them or figure it out, and who cares? But don't forget, like when we had all these, what would now be, they were millionaires back then, but they're the equivalent of a billionaire. I mean, we had so few people in the competitive workforce, right? You kept Black people out, you kept a lot of immigrants out, and you kept women out. Like the number of people that actually could even get a slice of the pie, potentially get a slice of the pie, was so much smaller. Now it's the veneer of possibility is there, but we know that you can call it the glass ceiling, the bamboo ceiling, like all these ways that certain groups can only get to a particular height. Or if they do get to a particular height, it's a setup, right? You become president of a university, but you have a billionaire who's mad that you're the president of the university. So from day one, they just sit there and start a campaign to undermine you in every single way and shape and form, so you can't even do your job. So I think we just have a lot more players, and it's a lot more complicated because we are so interconnected globally and in a tech space. But I would argue that this country has always been who she is. And so the influence of very, very white, powerful and wealthy white men to get what they want is not anything that is brand new to this country. Instead of trading people, we're just trading widgets.
Right. I have a lot to unpack with that, but I want to move on to one other thing I want to talk with you about, which is you mentioned Jimmy Carter is your favorite president.
He was my favorite living president. LBJ is my favorite president, period. So Jimmy was a number 2.
So just before we talked, I went over to what's called Twitter, where Michael Harriot is still active. Mm-hmm. And Michael had tweeted, whitewashing the uncomfortable parts of the past doesn't just affect Black stories. For example, you can't fully appreciate how a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia became a beloved president unless true Black history, the unwhitewashed history of Jimmy Carter, a thread. And then he writes an essay about the history of the Carter family and how they got to be whoever they were. And I wonder if you have any thoughts around the whitewashing of Carter, specifically the nuances around who he was and why you say he's your second favorite.
Yeah, I mean, of all presidents and all men, they get whitewashed in history, sure. One, I always tell Michael, I hope he one day collects all these really important threads and puts them in a book, just because his level of detail is really fascinating.
Yeah.
The reason why I tell my students that they all have to have a favorite president, one, they just have to have one favorite president, but if we want to get a little complicated, we can have a favorite living president and a favorite deceased president. The reason why I make them sit there and think about it and tell me is because I need them to understand that none of these men are perfect. And if we're sitting around waiting for a perfect presidency, you're never going to get it. You're never going to get a perfect man. When I tell people I love LBJ, I have to be careful with my effusive love of LBJ, because if I'm talking to a Vietnam vet, they're ready to throw me down a flight of stairs. They think I'm absolutely insane, whether they're Black or non-Black, right? But my love for LBJ stems from how he was able to wrangle through the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Immigration Act, the Housing Act, and larger programs within the Great Society. With Jimmy Carter and the Carter family, I mean, if we start going through white people's family histories, that's a losing proposition. But if I think about how much I care about the environment, and did he have some racist family members? Absolutely. Was he always on the right side of history? I mean, LBJ was like a good old boy. I mean, he rampant use of the N-word in the Oval Office. So when I think about someone like Jimmy Carter, who put solar panels on the White House in the late 70s, I think about the potential. And we start our conversation off talking about the wildfires in California and the drought and all these other sort of environmental catastrophes that continue to befall communities across all 50 states that are affecting all different types of people. If I think about the potential of Jimmy Carter as an environmentalist president, I can't not respect his vision of what he's done. If I think about Jimmy Carter as a man after the presidency, the thousands upon thousands of houses that he's built, that people in DC and all over the country still live in, first homes, an opportunity, especially for poor people and certain communities of Black people who never would have had an opportunity to own anything in this country were it not for Jimmy Carter and his literal physical labor of building homes. We can't imagine on a micro and macro level what he did for 40 years after he was kicked out of office. So
eradicating that worm parasite was.
Yeah. Seriously, you can't wrap your mind around the public service. He wasn't interested in going to Hollywood and making money.
Right.
He wasn't interested in building some like global democracy center and making money. Yes, I'm throwing shade at lots of former presidents who were doing that. So as a public servant, I dare you to name me a president who, from JFK to the present, who did more as a public servant than Jimmy Carter.
Right.
So for me, I'm not looking for a perfect litmus test. I'm not looking for a perfect past of someone's family history. That's not my interest. I'm looking for, what did you do, especially for Black people, but what did you do for Americans? What did you do for this country? What did you do for Black people? And I'm like, if I'm lining Jimmy Carter up, let's look at the sample size, because I'm not comparing Jimmy Carter to a random carpenter or a random businessman. Right. I'm comparing Jimmy Carter to the small group of people in his set. And so that would be, start with LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. Boom. Where's the question? Where is the question? There is no question. There is no debate. So,
I mean,
there's that.
I feel like one of the most important points about him was that he was not without an ego. He ran for president. He was president, but it did not seem to drive him the way it does the carpenter, all other presidents, most men, me. Like, ego was not front and center for him. He had a ranch house. He didn't care that much seemingly about money. He lived his values, but it wasn't about so much about him. And he's the anti-Trump, the anti-average man, really, in terms of the way he looked at himself, talked about himself, put himself out there. It just didn't seem like ego was such an animating motivation for him as he walked through life and lived each day, the way it is for most of us, men especially.
Everyone says about the presidency, but you can translate this to governors, mayors, whomever. The presidency doesn't change you. It exposes who you are. It doesn't change your behavior. It just highlights your intrinsic behavior. And so the presidency exposed Jimmy Carter was a good man. Like the same way Joe Biden's legacy in the long run will show he's a good man. He cared about this country. He didn't steal from the country. He didn't help people steal from the country. Does he have missteps? Sure. Management skills lacking at times? Okay. But we have yet to find a perfect president. But I do think that there's this non-quantifiable characteristic that we only respect years after someone's been booted out of office. And that's, are you a good person? Joe Biden said messed up racial things. So have all of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Obama included.
Yeah.
I just think that whitewashing history is not healthy or necessary. But I'm like, am I going to pick the kernels out that actually do matter?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to do so because I need my students to understand as they work their way up the public service ladder. Like, I'm not asking for perfection. It's not going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to compromise. You're going to have to screw some people over, sadly, and it happens. The key is, how can you decrease the number of people you have to let go as you climb up the mountain?
Yes. Very well said. All right. Before I let you go, something completely different. What is let's go to Chrissy Greer now. What is Chrissy's relationship with this season of the year? You spent most of your life, I feel like, living in the Northeast. You have traveled as much as most people I know. You do like the sun, but you live in Brooklyn. What is your advice? What is your relationship with and advice around winter? We've got a good 8 weeks of cold. It's very cold right now in the Northeast. Go ahead. Take it away.
So I tell my students all the time, seasonal affective disorder is real. And so for people who do feel depressed, it's okay, right? You're not going crazy. Millions and upon millions of people are affected by it. So I'm doing little things. One, it's cold as all get out, but I still I'm trying to walk and see my little birds because there's still birds.
Okay.
Out there,
you
right?
go out there, you bundle up, you bundle yourself up.
Yeah, but listen, treated myself to a nice big coat when I was on a work trip in Vancouver. I was like, they know what cold is. Let me get this coat.
I assumed a coat, but what are we doing on our head? Is there a big scarf for Chrissy out there? All skin?
So when I went to Iceland, I bought myself a fleece, little those mini turtlenecs. And I just wear it all the time. It's amazing. I have a cashmere hat that's hot as all get out.
Okay.
So cashmere is my thing. I have my cashmere sweater now. I wear a lot of cashmere. I got into it during lockdown. So I'm bundled up. I watch the birds. I've been painting my nails fluorescent colors in winter. And the number of people who stop me on the street to say thank you for my nails, they just brought me so much joy.
Wow.
So I've been painting right now, it's I choose a color for every year. Last year, the color was green. Nature, health, wellness, wealth, the whole thing. This year, the color's orange, the color of peace. And so peace within myself, peace in the world. right? I went to Catholic school. We used to sing the song, your listeners, those of you who went to Catholic school know, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. So I'm like, there's a reason why the song is the song. It makes total sense. So I started off the year with my orange. Again, everyone's like, your nails make me so happy. Sure. Okay. Like they make me happy. So I'm glad that they can make someone else happy.
So you don't wear, so you purposely don't wear gloves because of the happiness your bright orange nails bring.
Well,
so you're not getting gloves because of the power of your hands.
I wear gloves. I tend to not love gloves because I need my hands, but I wear the gloves with the half.
That's smart. So you wear fingerless gloves so they can still get the joy of your fingers, but you're not cold. I like it.
And I'm also on the subway, so I need to get in my wallet to get things out.
Text, you got to be able to. You can't text with
exactly. I always have trips lined up, so like I'm in the process of lining up trips to stay warm and get out of New York. I'm a firm believer you have to leave New York to love New York. Like,
right.
If you stay in the city, I just feel like, at least for me, it makes me less compassionate in the sense that, the go, where I'm like looking at elderly people, I'm looking at people in strollers and I'm like, beat it. So it's okay. When you're trying to push aside an 85-year-old, it's time for me to take a quick vacation.
To take a break.
It's time to just take a quickie. Someplace preferably warm.
Okay, so I've got it. I gave